Here on this October the 3rd. Can you believe it? 2024. Man, oh man, it's just unbelievable what is going on these days in our churches and in our country and in the world. Let me tell you something. The entire world is looking for a man to come on the scene and save them from all the problems and all the difficulties. The world is looking for that. And by the way, that man is out there. And he's going to be called the Antichrist. He's ready to come on the scene. So something is withholding that day, and that something is us, the Holy Spirit in us, the restrainer within God's people. Okay? And I want to tell you about something that I want to share something with you. Many of you, because I watch what people post, some of the folks, some of the other ministries, and some of you still don't get it. I pay very little attention to the Feast of Trumpets on the Hebrew calendar. Every year, everybody gets all excited. I think it was last night. The Feast of Trumpets in Israel, Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year. It is their New Year's. And I have not paid much attention to that since 2014, when I wrote the best-selling book, God's Final Jubilee. That book has dwarfed into, it had a second edition with a new cover. And then it, I don't know if I guess I don't have one sitting here. It became the Mystery of the Jubilee book. And I encourage you to get that book if you don't have it. And in there, I talk about the 2020, the 2520 phenomenon. Really amazing. In fact, there's a chapter in that book about the mystery of 2520. That is also in my brand new book, The Prophecy Puzzle, what I'm going to share with you tonight. And the fact that the tribulation period is two halves of 1,260 days each. And that cannot be broken. I know everybody fights over the extra 75 days that Daniel talks about, the 1335. We can discuss that another day, but let me tell you this. There's no contradictions in the Bible. That does not change the fact, regardless what you think of the extra days, the 75 days and the 1335, those do not and cannot change the length of the tribulation, which is in two halves of 1260 and 1260. In fact, the two witnesses, their ministry is exactly 1,260 days. The Bible tells us that. Now, that cannot be changed. It cannot be altered. All right? So, the 2520, that's how long their ministry is. So from the rapture till the end of the ministry of the two witnesses is 1,260 days. Now, I believe I know when they're going to die, and I believe I know when they're going to raise from the dead. And they're not going to be buried, by the way. The Bible says that the Antichrist will kill them. He'll go into the temple. The abomination takes place right there. I believe it's Passover. He's going to be allowed to kill the two witnesses, Moses and Elijah. No doubt about who they are. People can argue Enoch all they want. Enoch is not one of the two witnesses. It's Moses and Elijah. The Bible tells us so. In Matthew 17, it's very plain. Okay? And after 6 days, he takes Peter and James and John up apart into a mountain to pray. There's the prophetic lesson of the rapture. After 6,000 years, the rapture happens. And you listen, after 6 days. And hey, are we there yet? We're very close. And then two men come down, and their names, it's Moses and Elijah, and they speak with the Lord, and then they go back to paradise, awaiting their time to come and fulfill their role as the two witnesses to Israel during the tribulation period, the first half. All right. Now, what's this thing about? What am I talking about here? Here's what I did in 2014. I did something that nobody else that I know of has done or has done since, unless they've read my book and maybe copied me. But I don't know of any book that's ever talked about what I did. I decided to quit counting years. Everybody counts years on the Gregorian calendar. You'll never figure this out. You'll never figure this out using 365-day years. It's not possible. 1260 is not is not a 365-day count. You cannot get two 1260s in 7 years. They're sabbatical cycles is what they are. You got to do this right. So, the seven feasts. Now, you can argue all you want. If you want to argue the seven feasts don't mean what we say they mean, there's nothing prophetic about it. And maybe you don't think that the Lord's coming on the Feast of Trumpets. That's fine. You can think anything you want. You can go to bed tonight smiling. You can believe anything you want. But if you'll do some serious study, if you'll get an understanding of what the seven feasts are in Leviticus chapter 23, and I write about it. I got several chapters on the seven feasts. It's God's prophetic calendar. It has a literal application, has figurative lessons, but it is also prophetic of the entire 7,000-year period down here on this earth. And I won't go through it all, but it begins with Passover. By the way, that's where it all begins. Getting the blood applied to your heart. That's where life begins. Okay, that's salvation. And you got unleavened bread, and you got Feast of First Fruits. They crossed the Red Sea on first fruits, and they're going to go to the mountain. And the first Pentecost in the Bible is Moses coming down the mountain with the tablets in his hand, and on I could go here. So here's what, and then you get your three fall feast, Feast of Trumpets, Day of Atonement, they call it Yom Kippur, and then Tabernacles. There's no question what Tabernacles represents, right? Tabernacles represents the kingdom age. Tabernacling with God, dwelling with God. That's what the word literally means, to dwell with. And that's coming. That's going to be the 1,000-year kingdom age. We're going to dwell with God. We're going to tabernacle with Him. All right. Day of Atonement. I believe that's Christ coming on the white horse. What happens on the Day of Atonement every 49 years, class? Leviticus chapter 25. He goes into the 7 years. Every seventh year, you let it's a sabbatical year, and you don't plant your garden, and you let the land rest. And 7 of those 7-year cycles is 49 years, and on that 49th year, according to Leviticus 25, the trumpet of the Jubilee is sounded. Now, what is the Jubilee all about? Well, my whole ministry revolved around the Jubilee since 2014, God's final Jubilee. In fact, my personal bookstore website is godsfinaljubilee.com. And then we started Prophecy in the Spotlight, Doc and I did, and we got a new website, and everything became Prophecy in the Spotlight. But when you click on Dan's bookstore, it takes you to godsfinaljubilee.com. What do we learn about the Jubilee? The Jubilee is about property. There's other things, but for the main thing about the Jubilee is property going back to the original owner. That's what it was all set up to do. Keeping the land that God promised to the 12 tribes in the hands of the right people. And so the trumpet would sound on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. On the Day of Atonement, the trumpet would sound, and the Jubilee began, and it lasted an entire year, all the way until Tishri 1, start of the next year. So a 50-year period of time. Okay, so where does that leave the final feast, feast number 5, the Feast of Trumpets? What does that represent? Tabernacles represents the kingdom age. Day of Atonement represents Christ on the white horse coming back to claim the property, planet Earth, and to once again rule and have Israel in their place. It's property. It's about property. That's why there's no doubt in my mind Christ is coming on the Day of Atonement. I believe that's when the final seal is opened, the final trumpets have all sounded, the final vial of the wrath of God has taken place, and Christ comes back with his wife, not the bride, not the espoused bride. She's now his wife. Comes back with the saints, with us, back to the planet, he takes back what was his, the property, the earth. Okay? So, no doubt in my mind, Day of Atonement is the second coming of Christ. What does that leave left? Rosh Hashanah, the Feast of Trumpets, I believe is prophetic of the rapture. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. People can argue all you want. You can thumb up your nose at it. Go ahead. You go study a few thousand hours like some of us have. And the problem is some of you are just scoffers is what you are. Let me ask you a question. I didn't plan on doing this. Let me say this. Do you think when God created everything that he just created it figuring we'll just see what happens? How many of you think that's what God did? How many of you think that God didn't already have a plan how long the world was going to be? I guarantee you he did. Guarantee. God's a God of order. Everything God does is laid out. It's organized. It has a plan. I am convinced, according to Genesis 1 and 2, the 7 days of creation, I am convinced that God created this universe outside of time and space for a 7-year period of time, which is what? A giant sabbatical cycle. There we are with those 6 years man labors, 7th day man rests. 6 days God created, 7th day God rested. Right? Are you still with me there? These are principles all the way back in the beginning of Genesis. In my Prosy puzzle book, my newest book, it's only been out 6 or 8 weeks now. I believe the most important book that God has laid upon my heart to write. I think it lays it all out, puts it all in order, helps you put the puzzle together. And I believe that there can be no question when God created this thing, God created it for a period of 6,000 years and then a kingdom age where we will dwell with God. And so it's all laid out. A day is with the Lord is 1,000 years, 1,000 years a day. So you don't think that God already had decided how long we were going to be on the earth when he created us? Sure he did. What does Revelation say? It says that Christ died before the foundation of the world. In other words, before God created Adam, before God created the world, before God created this universe, in the third heaven where God dwells, Jesus had already paid the sin debt of the world. Now, in our understanding, because we're in time here, we're confined to time and space. It hadn't happened yet. But where God dwells, where God sees the whole history of the world from Adam all the way to the end of the kingdom age and the new heaven and new earth, God saw it all. Now, you can't wrap your brain around that, obviously. You can't comprehend that. And you don't have to. You just believe it. You know that God is God, and God knows the beginning from the end before it even happened, okay? God created this thing according to so many different scriptures and principles throughout the Bible. There is no doubt God planned this thing to be a 7,000 year, a giant sabbatical cycle. And those 7 years are all through the Bible. The number 7 is all through the Bible. And all right, so listen. God created this thing. God already planned a church age. A lot of people get confused. They think that because the Jews didn't accept him, God changed his plan. There was always going to be a church age, always. Now, I believe Israel was going to head up that church, which they did for about 7 months, until Stephen. And I believe Stephen is where everything changed, and the Gentile became the Gentile church, Jew and Gentile, but the grafting in, okay? So, Feast of Trumpets, I believe, is a type of the trumpet sounding in heaven and Christ coming in the clouds to take his bride to the marriage supper. Right? The marriage supper. Not only that, we're going to have our bodies there. We're going to have... All right, still with me? I had a call come in. That's the second time that fella has called me when I'm doing a live stream. I'm going to have to get after him, and I'll call him back. All right, so Feast of Trumpets, the rapture. What's it say in Revelation 4:1? Right after the church age, the final Laodicean age of the church. What does it say? After this. After what? After the church age is over. After this. Behold, a door was opened in heaven. And I heard a voice as it was of a trumpet saying, come up hither. Come up hither. Does that not sound like caught up to you? Caught up, come up. Did you notice the trumpet there? A voice as of a trumpet. What does Thessalonians say? The trump of God shall sound. The dead in Christ shall rise first, and we which are alive and remain shall be caught up. So shall we ever be with the Lord. The rapture is associated with the blowing of a trumpet. I believe when you study the Jewish wedding in Bible days, you'll find that the son would make his ask his fiance or ask his girl. He would invite her to become his husband. If she said yes, long story short here, if she said yes, he would leave her the contract. He would leave her a gift, and these are all symbolic of amazing things biblically. And he would go to his father's house, like John 14:6 says, in my father's house are many mansions. I go to prepare a place for you. He would go home to prepare a house for his new bride to be. They're a spouse. They're contracted for marriage. He goes and begins work on the house. The father, decides when he's ready to go get his bride. Not the son, not the groom, the father. Okay? And I joke about that. I said, if it was up to us, we'd go get a tent at Walmart and set up a tent and go get our bride and get married, right? And no, dad decides. And when the father decides it's time and the house is done, he's satisfied, he announces it with the blowing of a trumpet. And then the groom and the best man and others will go and they'll look for the lantern in the window, and there'll be a shout made, and his espoused bride would get up and grab her bag already packed, and he would carry her out the door over the threshold, and off they would go, and the marriage would take place shortly thereafter. Okay, trumpets. All right, so with all that said, whether you believe Feast of Trumpets and the seven feasts mean anything, you can believe what you want. But I'm telling you, the seven feasts is a prophetic calendar in the Word of God. And you'll find these feasts mentioned all over them, even in the New Testament. Hey, Christ, 1 Corinthians 5:7, Christ, our Passover, is given for you. That's New Testament. Passover is about salvation. When I see the blood, I'll pass over you. Unleavened bread is the process of growth and grace, getting junk out of you, like getting sin out. And first fruits, they crossed the Red Sea, 1 Corinthians 10, 1-4, Acts chapter 7, verse 38. This was that church in the wilderness. That's Stephen talking about an Old Testament example of the children of Israel crossing the Red Sea, being baptized into, not salvation, the blood did that, baptized into a church. Not a New Testament church, but the church in the wilderness, okay? And Pentecost, God empowers the church, and then 2,000 years later, the trumpet will sound on Feast of Trumpets, and that's the rapture. 7 years after that, or 2,520 days after that, Christ comes back on the white horse, and then a few days later, he will set up the kingdom, Feast of Tabernacles. All seven feasts perfectly embody the whole thing down here on this earth. Not only that, they embody the journey of an unbeliever into salvation all the way through his Christian life. That's in the puzzle book, by the way. And very important stuff. All right, with that said, and I didn't mean to take this long. I didn't mean to go into all that. I was going to come in here for 10 minutes and share something. And I wound up having to prove some things to you. Okay, so with all that said, in 2014, I went to the end. Since the Day of Atonement, since the Day of Atonement, I believe, without a doubt, is the second coming of Christ on the white horse, at the end of the 70th week of Daniel, at the end of the marriage supper, because he's coming with a title deed in his hand to take back possession of planet Earth. That is a jubilee. I believe he's coming on the Jubilee. I believe that's the second coming. Okay? Um, a trumpet will sound. He's coming on the white horse with the saints, and he's going to take back the planet. He's going to end the battle of Armageddon, go to Jerusalem, split the mountain of olives. He's going to rule with the rod of iron, and for 1,000 years. Amen. So I decided in 2014 to go find the Day of Atonement in the future. Now, there's always the possibility that those dates are not correct, and that after the rapture, the Antichrist or the Jews change something. But I doubt that. I doubt that very much. Because remember, the first half of the tribulation, the Jews are not even saved. Nobody's saved. Why would they change their calendar? They're very proud about this. They think they've got this right, and they don't. But I believe the calendar they have will continue to be used, and I believe the Day of Atonement will be the same in the tribulation as it is now. If it is, and again, I can't be 100% on that, but if it is, you can go on a computer, you can go in the future, and you can find the Day of Atonement all the way through 1,000 years in the future if you want to. What I did is I went 7 years in the future. I found the Day of Atonement. In other words, if the rapture is this year, I went 7 years in the future to find the Day of Atonement. And once I found the Day of Atonement, I got my marker. Okay, a marker. And so then I got on the time and date calendar, and I put in, I found the 2520 mark. In other words, I went backwards. If the tribulation is 2,520 days, and it is, if it is, and we know when he comes back on the white horse, can't we find the rapture? Again, you can't be dogmatic about this stuff, but so I found the Day of Atonement. This year, it is September 26, 2031 is the Day of Atonement, 7 years from this year. So I did the math. Of course, I did this in 2014. I did like 7 or 8 years. I put them in the book and showed everybody. What I found was shocking. I'm talking about in 2014. What I found was shocking. Now listen to this. You can't make this up. This is mathematics, and it's unbelievable. This is God. What I found was, going backwards from the Day of Atonement, going backwards the length of a tribulation period, 2,520 days, what I found was it always came to a new moon in the sky in either October or November, not sometimes, not once in a while, every time. A new moon in the sky. You understand the Feast of Trumpets is the only feast of the 7 that takes place on a new moon. Feast of Passover is on a full moon, 14th of the month, on the Jewish calendar. It's the full moon. Feast of Trumpets is the only feast of the 7 that takes place on day 1 of a new month, which is a new moon. Their calendar is based off the moon. In other words, the new moon is day 1. The 14th day of their month is full moon. It doesn't matter, doesn't synchronize with our calendar now. Their calendar always, day 1 on any month you want to pick on the Hebrew calendar, every day 1 on that calendar is a new moon in the sky. That's how their calendar works. So what I found was every time, it was October, November, or November, October, I forget which, but it was like that. And the reason it bumped from October to November every 3 years was because of the leap year. I don't have time to get in that, but every 3 or 4 years they add a whole month to their calendar. Throws everything off. It's kind of a biblical thing, but they're not doing it right. In Bible days, it was the barley harvest that determined when Passover was. Passover, by the way, is feast number 1 of the 7 feasts. So if you change the month of Passover because of the harvest, then it changes the other 6 feasts. They all bump a whole month. You with me there? In other words, if Passover is in April on our calendar, then 7 months later is, the September month. On their calendar, it's the month Abib. And And that's how they reset their calendar every few years, because there's only 354 days on the Hebrew calendar, and there's 11 days missing every year, because a solar year is 365 and a fourth. So about every 3 years, guess what? There'll be a whole month off. So what did they do? They didn't have computers back then. What they did was they went by the barley harvest. The barley harvest is planted in the fall, and it comes up in the spring. And that's how they keep the seasons right. And I have a saying in the book: no barley, no Abib, no Passover. And so the priesthood would decide each year in the month of Adar, right before Passover month, they would look at the field and they would decide if it's ready or not, or if it's going to be ready. And if it's not, they would add a leap month, and that would back everything. So you couldn't make any plans. You couldn't set your schedule and get a hotel for Pentecost, because you didn't know which of the 2 months it was going to be until Abib was declared. Now remember, the Jews were smart people. They could look at the field. They knew. They didn't have to wait. They knew if the barley was ripe or not, and they would take, but it wasn't official until it was official, right? And because they had to have barley. Listen now, they had to have barley for Passover, because on the feast of first fruits they waved a sheaf of barley. That's just a few days after Passover. If there's no barley, they can't do that. They can't obey the scripture. Okay? Everybody still with me? So what does this mean? Oh, and by the way, let me say this. In my checking that, all the 8 or 10 different years I've looked, in fact, I've looked at more than that, it never comes out to Feast of Trumpets on the Jewish calendar. Never. That's why I don't look at it. The Feast of Trumpets on the Hebrew calendar, in fact, we just had it October 2nd. I'm looking at my calendar. I haven't changed it. It says September over there. I got to fix that. October 2nd was Feast of Trumpets. That does not fit the 2520. In other words, if the rapture was to have happened on the 2nd, yesterday, on the Feast of Trumpets on the Jewish calendar, the 2520 length of the tribulation does not fit with Day of Atonement. It's a whole month off. So that's why I went to the end and worked backwards. And this is I've been telling people this since 2014, 10 years now. I'm telling you, November the 1st is a new moon in the month of November, and I believe it is the date that we should be looking at. Now, I'm not a date setter. People accuse me of being a date setter. I'm not, never have been. But every year I have a date that I look at, that I decide if this is the year. I think that would be a good day for. That doesn't mean I'm right. And there's a whole lot of variables that could be mixed up, and how do we know where we are here? I'm just telling you. I've told you what I do. I go to the Day of Atonement. I back up 2,520 days. I do it every year. I can show you a date every year that looks like the day that fits for the 2520 and for the rapture. So I'm not saying the rapture is November 1st. I'm saying that if the rapture is this year, I believe that would be the date of the rapture. Not only that, but the middle of the tribulation is important too. And if you go with October 2nd, the middle of the tribulation doesn't come out right either. The middle of tribulation has to be Passover time. Read Daniel 9, read Matthew 24 and other places. The abomination of desolation, that's Passover. That's where Antichrist goes in and he becomes the Messiah. And for 3.5 days, the Jews are excited about it until the 2 witnesses get up and they ascend to heaven the same day Jesus did on the Feast of First Fruits. None of that fits if you don't use the right date for Feast of Trumpets, the 2520 date. Remember now, Feast of Trumpets is not set in stone. Every year, this is what I try to help people understand. Every year, In Bible days, you didn't know when feast. You could guess, but you couldn't be sure until the barley is getting close. And once you know that, then you know, okay, the barley's almost ripe. Okay, Passover will be 2 weeks away, on the 14th of the month of Abib. But the word Abib means ready or ripe for harvest. And you cannot declare Abib if it's not ready for harvest. Okay? It's in my barley harvest book. It's in my 7 clocks of ticking book. There's a section on it in there. My brand new book, the puzzle book. I call it the final piece of the puzzle, the barley harvest. God gave that to me. And 2016, I think, somewhere in there, God gave me this stuff on the barley harvest. And, tremendous stuff. Okay, so what I'm saying is the 2520 does not fit with October. And what does everybody do? They say, well, God's gonna have a gap. I don't believe in the gap theory in Genesis, and I don't believe in a gap theory in Revelation 4. I don't believe there's a gap. When the door is opened in heaven in Revelation 4:1, and he hears the trumpet, John starts to see what's happening in heaven. He sees the book in the right hand of him on the throne. He sees Jesus come up and take the book and open the first seal. I don't believe there's any gaps there. And if there is a gap, where do you put that? Where do you put that month? Is it Old Testament? Is it New Testament? Is it church? What is it? No. I believe it's the same day Stephen died, Feast of Trumpets. I believe the clock stopped for Israel there and began ticking for the church age, and for the 2,000-year age we're in. And when the rapture happens, it'll be the same day that the clock stopped. There won't be a second missed. It'll be like a chess clock. And I used to bring a chess clock to my meetings and explain this to people. And I have it in my slides. When one clock stops, another clock starts. And it's going to be a perfect 6,000 years and then the kingdom age. It's going to be a perfect 7,000 years, right to the second. Let me say this also. If this thing's a perfect 6,000 years and 7,000 years, 6,000 to the kingdom age and then 7,000, to the end. If it's a perfect period of time, get this now, it has to end where it began. In other words, the rapture has to be the same day creation started. Guess what day people believe that creation began in Genesis? The old Jews believed this. Josephus believed it. Bishop Usher, who gave us the dates, he believed it. He believed that Tishri 1 at 6 p.m. was the beginning of day 1 in Genesis, the first day of creation. Remember now, he said the evening and the morning were the first day, the second day. He didn't say the morning and the evening. The evening and the morning. When's the evening? 6 p.m., sundown. Everything began in our universe at 6 p.m., Tishri 1. It would have been in the fall. And by the way, God created everything fully grown. Adam was fully grown. The apple trees would have been fully grown. Whatever Adam was going to eat, those plants, it would have been harvest time. Yeah. Anyway, that's just something for you to think about. So, what am I saying tonight? I'm saying I never pay attention to the Feast of Trumpets on the Jewish calendar. It's a day that is determined by the barley harvest. They're not using that system today. It's computerized. It's not biblical. And by the way, what does the barley harvest mean prophetically? Well, you read the book of Judges, the story of Gideon, and I have this in my books. It's in the puzzle book. It's in the 7 clocks book. It's in the barley harvest book. The story of Gideon, the cake of barley rolling down the hill. Remember the dream the Philistine had, or the Midianite, whatever it was. Can I do a video on the 75-day interview? Maybe. I don't know. I'm not 100% sure that I have the answers to that. I may have, but again, there's some speculation involved there. But what we do have is several places in the Bible where it tells us the first half, the two halves are 42 months each. The two halves are 1,260 days each. That's set in stone. That cannot be changed. And so the 75 days and the 1335 days is one of two things, and I don't have time to get into that. But we can maybe look at that sometime, and maybe Doc and I'll do an update on that. And all right, so the barley, according to Judges, when they see the cake of barley, he said that's none other than the house of Israel, the sword of Gideon. He said, and we're going to die today. Barley is Israel. The wheat represents the church. Barley is Israel. What is God looking at to determine the timing of the end? He's looking at Israel. When Israel is Abib, ripe, ready, God will hit the reset button. That'll happen at the very end of the month of Adar. 7 months later, to the day, will be the sounding of the trumpet on the feast, on the Feast of Trumpets, the real Feast of Trumpets. Okay, it's determined 7 months earlier by the barley harvest, and we can't know when that happens. We can look at Israel, and by the way, doesn't it look like they're kind of surrounded by enemies on all sides, and that life there, as we know it, could end in an hour? We know it won't because we've read ahead in the book, right? We skipped ahead to the end and we found out Israel makes it. But I mean, doesn't it look to you like the end is near? If you don't think so, I'm not sure you're paying attention. And thanks, Van. He puts up scriptures for me. That's awesome. He's been putting scriptures up while I'm talking. This is great. And so it's in the comments. If you go look at Van's comments, you'll see he's putting scriptures up. He just put up Judges chapter 7, the story of Gideon. Right? It's Judges, right? Not Joshua. Judges. Yeah. And, okay. So that's why I'm looking at November the 1st. I'm not a date setter. I'm not selling my stocks. Not that I have much. I'm not going to go splurge and send all my money to a mission field because I know the end. I don't know that, and neither do you. We don't know if this is the year, and if this is the year, you still can't be dogmatic about this stuff. All right, I'm just saying from what I've studied, what I understand about the 7 feasts, the 25, 20, and all that. These dates, October, November, new moon dates, I think fit. And by the way, and I forgot to say this, in the middle of the tribulation, if the rapture was November 8th, that would make the second coming on Yom Kippur, September 26, 2031. And the middle of the tribulation would be April the 14th, 2028. Now, by the way, April the 14th is not Nisan. That's not Passover. It's I think it's 3 days after Passover. You see, the witnesses' ministry is not over when they die and they're left in the streets. That's not the end of their ministry. The end of their ministry is 3.5 days later when they get up on their feet and they ascend up into the heavens, just like Jesus did, and very probably on the same day that Jesus did, the Feast of First Fruits, Saturday night at 6 p.m. And it fits. It fits. October 2nd does not fit. The middle's not right, and Day of Atonement's not right. So I'm looking at November 1st, but I'm not selling my properties. I'm not doing stupid stuff. And I'm not telling people, hey, the Lord's coming November 1st. And don't you do that either. But if you get a hold of this and understand what I'm saying tonight, you'll realize why I don't pay much attention to the Jewish Hebrew calendar Feast of Trumpets. I haven't since 2014 when I uncovered this. I always have the next month. And sometimes it's November. And but it's usually October. I think 2 to 1. It's October if I remember right. Yeah, if you have my old Jubilee book, you can see and look it up and see. All right, does that help anybody tonight? I hope so. Um, keep hope. Hey, if he doesn't come November 1st, that's all right. We can take it. It just means we got some more junk to go through before the Lord comes. We got more time to reach people. Got more time to reach our loved ones and our family and our relatives and neighbors and children and cousins and let's do something. Let's not just sit back. Let's be busy. Occupy till I come, he said. That doesn't mean sit in a lawn chair waiting for the rapture. Occupy. Take some land. Take some kingdoms is what he's talking about. All right, well, I went way past what I wanted to do tonight on time, but I guess maybe this is what the Lord wanted tonight. I hope you're doing well. If you don't have my prophecy puzzle book, get that thing. And by the way, I'm working on the Daniel study guide. It'll be ready soon. And you can pre-order that on the website. Just go to prophecyandspotlight.com. It's right there. You can get 2 of them for $30. If the Lord don't come, Christmas is coming, right? And all right, the Daniel study guide is going to be awesome. It's going to be awesome. All right. Until next time, keep your eyes on them skies.